10th chapter of Matthew. Jesus says, "A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master. If they have called the master the house of Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them would fall to the ground unperceived by your Father. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I also will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I also will deny before my Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And one's foes will be members of one's own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." The gospel of the Lord. One of the seminary professors that I often look to for help in my preparations for Sunday morning sermons talked about this section of the gospel that I just read as being a collection of short sayings of Jesus that don't fit anywhere else in the story. So these short sayings can be a bit troubling and hard to follow. But that doesn't mean that we don't have something to say about them, and it doesn't mean we don't have something to learn from them. I truly believe that every word written in this Bible is inspired by the Holy Spirit for our good teaching and for our growth, and that each and every part of it has something to say to us. While reading today's gospel lesson, I wonder how many times you heard the words or the phrase, "Do not be afraid." Now, I know you weren't counting because I didn't tell you to count, but if you had been counting, you would have heard it 3 different times. Do not be afraid. In this day and age, like every other age that people have been alive, it's far easier to say, "Do not be afraid," than it is to actually do it. After 8 years of therapy, I have found that I have many more fears than I used to be able to admit. Being able to admit my fears has helped me deal with them. It doesn't mean that I have fewer fears or that all the fears go away. It just helps me deal with that fear when I get it out into the open. I think that one of the things that Jesus is trying to do among these do not fear statements is to help us get our fears out into the open. Once a fear is out, once it's out in the open, it doesn't mean that we have conquered it. And when I say out in the open, I don't mean that you've told the whole congregation about your fear. I mean that you've told yourself and God about your fear. And once it's out, you have much more control over it. It doesn't mean that we are more able to hear God say I am with you through the difficult times. Or I should say it does. I think I said doesn't. That's kind of a critical NT there, isn't it? It does mean that we are able to hear God say, I am with you through the difficult time. Over the past several months, many of us have learned that we are afraid. We're afraid of a virus that we can't see, that has no vaccine, and could be deadly. And some of us have learned that we may be unknowingly a carrier of that virus, and that we have a fear of passing that virus on to somebody much more susceptible than ourselves. And some of us have decided that we're not at all afraid of this virus. Do not fear, God says. Statements that Jesus makes in today's lesson. He never says that we won't have troubles. He never says that we're not going to have fears. He does say something to the effect that as long as the virus is around, I am with you. And one of my great fears with the virus is, as we gather next week in this place, that myself or one of you will be an unknown carrier of the virus and give it to somebody much more susceptible to it and can't handle it. That's a very real fear for me, and it helps to get it out, but I don't know when I'm going to be able to deal with it. Weeks, months from now, I'm not sure. Let's take a look at what Jesus has to say about it. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. And even the hairs on your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. Jesus doesn't say that sparrows aren't going to die. What he does say is that God is with them in that moment. Can you imagine? I thought it was hard for God to be with each person in the moment, but to be with each animal in the moment at the same time? If God is with the sparrows, how much more will he be with us? What else does Jesus have to say for us today? He says, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. In the little neighborhood that Susie and I live in, we have a very close-knit bunch of neighbors. And because it's so close-knit, and because Susie and I walk our dogs at least once a day in the neighborhood, I've kind of become the pastor to many of the people there in our neighborhood. One of our neighbors, for the last year and a half or so, has been battling brain cancer. When I first talked to her about her brain cancer and how she was feeling and what the prognoses were and all of those kind of things that we have in a conversation at that time, she simply wanted to get back to work helping people as a nurse at Kaiser. That was her goal. That was her calling in life, is to be a nurse and help people. She never got that chance. She has been battling this cancer, and it seems like it's the devil himself. It's brutal, and it's unrelenting. She starts to feel better, and then she takes several steps backwards. She never gets a break. For the last month or so, it's been obvious that she is in the last stages of her life. The other day, while walking past, her husband came out and asked Susie and I for more and deeper prayers. She was back in the hospital. She had more blood clots on her brain. And her husband was near tears telling us about this. And it's at times like this that I often don't even know what to pray for. Do I pray for a healing miracle, or do I pray for a smooth and painless death? Do not fear seems a little bit hollow. I did pray over and over that she would not die in the hospital without loved ones by her side. I've been through that twice already in this COVID time. Once with Tim Mag and once with Jim Scarston without being able to be by their side. And I knew that tiny bit of pain that goes with my not being able to be by their side, and I couldn't imagine her husband not being by her side. Fortunately, she's home now. She's not doing much better, but she is home. So now, what do I pray? This is where I rely on the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans, where he says, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we should. But that very Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. The Spirit intercedes with sighs too deep for words. With the assurance of God's presence in the words, do not be afraid. Every time I go past their house multiple times in a day, all I really can do is sigh and allow God to pray for me. In all of God's glory and all that is good in this world, we have also learned in the last many weeks that our black and brown sisters and brothers live in fear. And they have a great desire to be counted as equal among God's children and in society. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. I want to say that to my black brothers and my brown brothers and sisters, but again, I think it might sound kind of weak as they look for equality in our systemic system of oppression and unequal justice. In different ways, I have said it many times in the last few weeks. It's up to us as Christian children of God. It's up to us as Lutherans. It's up to us, especially who are white Lutherans, to take the first steps. To be able to make do not be afraid a reality for people of all races and religions and ethnicities that are different than ours. It is our calling to make the connections across those racial boundaries. It's our calling to take the first steps. In the book of Genesis, we learned that racial divides have been with us since the beginning of time. But that's not an excuse for us not to start today in dismantling those boundaries. If we don't start now, if we wait for the next generations to do the hard work, then it will take that much longer before our sisters and brothers can hear the words, do not fear, and understand them at the core of who they are and live them as God wants them to live. Hearing them no longer as a ring hollow to those who live in fear every day and every moment of their lives. There will always be things to fear in life. We live in a broken world that's full of sin and neglect. It is up to us to show the world that while fear is real, God's presence is of much more power. It is up to us to show the world that God has us in his hands and will never leave us. Remember last week I said as we read through the Gospel of Matthew, we should look through the lens of the Beatitudes that begin the Gospel, and we should also look through the lens of the Great Commission that ends the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus' very last words to his disciples. And remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. Amen.